The function of the United States Congress is to represent all of our people and not just the wealthiest and most powerful. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today, someone who is back in my home state every weekend. And as I talk to people and say, what's on your mind? They say what's on their mind are jobs, the economy, the nation's debt and the nation's spending. I say, what do you think about things going on in Washington? And they say, you know, the problem with Washington is it taxes too much, borrows too much, and the government grows bigger every day. And they say, what are we going to do about it? When we talk about the debt, the people of Wyoming have a clear understanding that the number is very, very large. And they say, well, what about the budget? And as we get into the discussion, it comes down to what budget? Where is the budget? It's been 800 days since a budget's gone through this body. Over 800 days. You know, you're talking more than 2 years. Why is that? I think there was a vote on a budget earlier this year that there was the president's so-called budget, lost 97 to nothing. Not even one Democrat voted for what the president had proposed. The magazine, the news magazine, The Economist, called it a dishonest budget. You know, in Wyoming, we balance our budget every year. We don't have a debt like the country has, the country with its $14 trillion debt. Wyoming, the debt is zero, because year after year we balance our budget, live within our means, spend only what comes in, and actually have money left over that we can invest in the people of our state. And it's because from the beginning, when the Constitution of our state was written, included right there in the Constitution is a component that says that you shall balance the budget every year. Don't spend more than we have coming in. So to do that, one of the most useful things is that there actually be a budget. Be a budget. Something to live within, something to look to as a guidepost, as a roadmap. I'm still looking for one in this body, Madam President. And where is it? Why haven't we seen one? And so that's why I'm coming to the floor today with a number of my colleagues to say what is going on that it's been over 800 days, no budget, no opportunity to have the American people look to a roadmap to see where the country is headed. We hear all the discussion about the fact that, you know, are we headed to a default? What about the debt limit? What about the ceiling? Is that going to be raised? The people say, what's the plan? What's the spending plan? What's the savings plan? I don't hear one coming forth from the majority party. I don't see one from the majority leader. I don't see one from the Budget Committee. I don't see one from the President. They're having discussions at the White House about how to try to get spending under control. I say, where's the President's plan? What I hear from the President is he wants to raise taxes. And the people of Wyoming would say the best way for more revenue to come in is not raise taxes on the people who are working. It's put some of those 9.2 million Americans, I'm sorry, 9.2% of Americans who are looking for work, put them to work. And then that money will come in as they pay taxes. So I come today to the floor, Madam President, with a number of my colleagues. Senator Sessions, the senator from Alabama, has arrived. And I know that we're going to be engaged in a colloquy and to discuss some of these issues. But I'll tell you, we ought to be focusing on these 9.2% of Americans who can't find work, what are millions and millions of Americans looking for jobs. And when I talk to the job creators, they're saying it's the President's position that is, and his policies that have made matters worse. Made matters worse with increasing health care costs as a result of the health care law, made matters worse as a result of the regulations coming out of Washington that add additional costs on the businesses, and making it worse in increased energy costs as the President continues to send energy jobs overseas as he makes it harder and harder to explore for American energy. And so, Madam President, I would ask my colleague, Senator Sessions, to give us his thoughts, if I could, on the concerns that we face as a nation without a budget, without a plan, without a roadmap at a time of astronomical deficit, huge numbers that are too high for people to even understand and comprehend.
I appreciate Senator Barrasso and his leadership on so many issues in this Senate. It is a sad event that we are now filing an objection to the movement of a appropriations bill because it violates the Budget Act contained in the United States Code. And the Budget Act says you shall not move forward with a appropriations bill if you haven't first passed the budget. So I guess my friend from Wyoming, accomplished orthopedic surgeon and physician, and his experience in the legislature in his state, does it strike him that when you're in the most serious debt crisis perhaps the nation's ever had from a structural, systemic point of view, that we ought to follow the law? We ought to first decide how much money we can afford to spend next year and then allocate that money to the various spending appropriations committees so that they can produce a plan that would live within that budget. Is that the common sense way that we should proceed?
Well, Madam President, I would say absolutely yes. I mean, if you're a family in Wyoming, and I don't care if you're living in Casper or you're living in Kemmerer, either way, you know you need to live within some construct of how much is coming in, how much can you spend, live within a budget. Families have budgets. They live within their budgets. The state of Wyoming has a budget. We have a balanced budget component of our Constitution. So it not only says we have to have a budget, it says you have to balance it. And if you don't have a budget to begin with, I can't understand how you can balance it. And so is it any surprise that we are $14 trillion in debt and we're borrowing $4 billion a day, $2 million a minute in this country, and we're borrowing a lot of it from China? And it would just seem that we ought to be following the law, having a budget, and then living within the budget, and it needs to be a responsible budget consistent with what's coming in.
I know we appreciate our colleagues who worked on this bill, but there's much, much more appropriations that should be done this year. And how can they be continued without a budget? You say, well, we spent within the President's numbers or the House numbers, but those have not been approved in the Senate. We've had no votes in the Senate. It's not a binding number. And the truth is, what we need to do is what the House did, I believe. Senator Barrasso, isn't it true that the Republican House, with a new leadership, came in, they faced up to the 10-year budget window that we have. They laid out a plan for 10 years. It cut spending by $6 trillion. It actually simplified our tax code substantially and reduced certain taxes, focusing on tax reductions that create growth so we could have more income generated. And whether you agree with it or not, by April 15th they did all this, which is what this code says. Don't you think they have done their duty? And what would you say about the Senate's failure to even attempt to present a budget?
Well, the House has approved a budget. They've presented a budget, debated a budget, discussed a budget, and passed a budget. Nothing in the Senate for over 800 days. And, you know, people at home tell me on the weekends, they say, you've got to stop spending money we don't have. Stop spending money we don't have. They say, we expect better. We expect better of those who are elected to go to Washington and represent us. We expect better. No, and, you know, the thing they also believe is that of the money that they're spending, that they're sending to Washington, it's their money. It's not Washington's money. It's their money. The money that they're sending to Washington, people don't believe they're getting value for their dollar. If you said of every dollar you send in, about how much value you're getting back, it's at an all-time low. It's less than 50 cents on the dollar. People think they're getting value. You know, people want efficient government, effective government. That's not what they're finding today. They're seeing amazing amounts of waste and fraud and abuse. But fundamentally, they're not seeing a budget, a roadmap for which to make a plan and then live within that. And that's why I come to the Senate floor with my colleague today from Alabama to say the law is specific. not just in the state of Wyoming, but also in the United States, that we need to have a budget?
The law is specific, and the need is there whether we had a law or not. The law doesn't require families to have budgets, but families that are smartly managing their money have budgets. Businesses have budgets. No law requires them to have budgets because it's the only way to manage your money. And it's really a unacceptable situation we find ourselves in. Senator Barrasso, let me ask you this, and I want to try to boil it down to the nub of why we haven't done it, why the majority in the Senate has not proceeded with the budget. And let me just say that a budget is considered so important that unlike other legislation, it can be passed with a simple majority. It cannot be filibustered. It has priority process to be moved rapidly on the floor. It can't be blocked. And so the goal is that you could pass a budget. Even a party, if they wanted to do it on a straight party line basis with over 50 votes, could pass a budget. And so I guess I'm trying to focus on, is there something broken about the Senate? Is there something broken that causes us not to be effective? Is there something broken in the way we operate that would have kept the Budget Committee from bringing a budget forward and voting on it in committee and passing it out of committee? They did that last year. Is there any reason that the Senator can think of a substantive nature that would have blocked that?
I would say the only reason I know is that someone intentionally doesn't want to bring a budget to the floor of the United States Senate. Because if a budget were on the floor of the United States Senate, then you could look through it, read it, people at home could look through it, have some input, call, write, talk to us at town hall meetings and say, you know, we ought to try to amend this proposal to spend less money over here, more money over there, try to decide the best way to work together as a nation to improve opportunities for people in this country. I mean, that's what a family budget does, whether they have to, and they don't have to by law, but smart families do that. They make plans, they think ahead, and not just 3 months or 6 months. Families look ahead to put money aside for college and opportunities. They think about, you know, will they need a new car, a new roof someplace down the line? What will they need? And that's what budgeting is all about. So I see no reason fundamentally why there isn't a budget proposed by the majority party here on the floor for all of the country to take a look at, all of the country to say, yeah, change this, more here, less there, reprioritize, and let the country work.
If the Senator would yield, unless you're unwilling to tell the American people where you stand, unwilling to put real numbers on paper. You prefer to say, well, American people, don't worry about it. We're meeting in secret over here. Don't worry about it. We've got the Vice President. He called some senators together. He's going to fix it. Oh, now the President's meeting in secret. Here, he stomped out of the meeting yesterday when some questions were asked. But so we're going to take care of it. You guys that serve on committees and the Finance Committee where taxes have to be voted on, should be voted on, you guys are no longer relevant. The system's broken. Don't worry about it. We're going to take care of it. That's what they're saying. That's what they're saying. They're saying we're not going to go along with this. And it's not because it won't work. It's because the budget presented, the only budget we've seen here, was presented by the President. It increased taxes substantially. It increased spending even more than that. And it increased the debt more than if we'd done nothing over the 10 years. So I see our colleague, Senator Toomey, a new senator, but not new to the budget process because he was a member of the Budget Committee in the House. So I guess what I'm frustrated about, and I believe people should be unhappy about, this decision, this policy decision by the leadership in the Senate that it was foolish to produce a budget is not a sign that the Senate is broken. It's a sign that the leadership is broken. It's a sign that leadership does not have the courage to actually stand before the American people and produce a plan, because it either would raise taxes too much, not cut spending too much, or raise the debt too much. And I think that's irresponsible. But I have to say, Senator Toomey, a new member of our Senate, he's produced a budget. He laid it out right in our committee. And he was prepared as a member of our committee to produce his budget and advocate for it. And you know what happened? We didn't meet. I can't call the committee into session. I'm the ranking Republican. Senator Toomey can't call the committee into session and have a vote. They decided not to meet, not to do their duty. And they're going to meet in secret somewhere and have their little discussions about what they want to do. And the people who are elected to be accountable to the American people for what we do with their money are just standing around wondering what's happening. Forgive me if I'm not happy. I don't think it's right. I think it's weakening the United States Senate. I believe our constitutional responsibility is not being fulfilled if we end up with some big deal bill on August 1st and we're told it's got to be passed by August 2nd, and you can find out what's in it after we pass it. I'm not there. Count me out. Senator Toomey, we had more people want to get on the Budget Committee this year. They were so excited. It was the most wanted committee to be on in the entire Senate, and we've not done anything. You were selected to be on the committee, which is a tribute to your experience, and I guess I would ask you, how do you feel about where we are?
Well, Senator Sessions, first of all, thank you for raising this issue, because I do think this is a very, very important issue. Many of us wanted to be on the Budget Committee because we see what a critical moment our country is in. We see the very dire straits that we have put ourselves in because of the fiscal irresponsibility of Washington. And some of us believe that we don't have a lot of time to get this in order. And so I was looking forward to the opportunity to serve on the committee that would design the blueprint for our entire fiscal policy for this year and hopefully beyond. I think this is a fundamental responsibility, frankly, of any responsible organization to have a budget. I ran a small business for years, my own little business. We always had a budget. The corner pizza shop has a budget. We are the biggest enterprise in the world, the United States government. We spend $3.6 trillion, and for the majority party to choose, really, I have to say cynically, to choose not to even write a budget, to abdicate that fundamental responsibility to lay out for the American people how much money they want to spend, on what they want to spend it, where the money is going to come from, to abdicate that responsibility is really shocking. But of course, to make matters worse, they have a statutory obligation to do this, so it's actually also illegal. And here we are without a budget. We're about to run out of this year's funding. When we come back from the August break, we're going to be passing some huge omnibus. Who knows what's in that? We have a completely broken down process. I believe it has contributed to where we are today with this debt limit. And by the way, a brief aside, if I could, about this debt limit issue, because we had a discussion today in the Banking Committee. Federal Reserve Board Chairman Bernanke was there to testify, and it was a useful discussion. Unfortunately, after I left the committee, I learned later that Senator Schumer began to discuss some of my remarks with Chairman Bernanke, and in the process, he grossly mischaracterized what I said. Now, I'm quite sure that Senator Schumer would never intentionally mischaracterize the remarks of one of his colleagues. So what I'd like to do is just clarify what was actually said so that in the future it won't be mischaracterized. I had observed that the Treasury will have more than enough cash coming in the form of tax receipts to pay the interest on our debt. in the event that we didn't raise the debt ceiling on August 2nd. I immediately went on to say, and I will now quote myself if you will allow, I said, now I don't know of anybody that suggests that we can or should go indefinitely without raising the debt ceiling, and I have argued that we would certainly be much better off reaching an agreement and raising the debt ceiling prior to August 2nd, end quote. That was characterized by Senator Schumer as follows, and I will quote him. He said, for a smart guy, now he was referring to me, believe it or not, I mean, to say we can pay the obligations and not pay the rest and that that's just fine, wow, I'm sort of surprised at it. Well, obviously, I never said it was just fine. What I have said is that we've got a dire crisis on our hands and we need to do something about it. And I don't know that we're going to get another opportunity than the opportunity over this question of whether and when and by how much we'll raise the debt limit. But I'm not going to sit by idly, and I'm not going to go along with some deal that raises the debt limit without making the real cuts in spending we need and the real process reform. So, Senator Sessions, as you know, some of us have advocated that there be a simple deal, if you will, preferably one that we would discuss in public, one that we'd have a debate over, one we'd have a vote on. And the deal is simply this. We will agree to raise the debt limit as the President has asked, by the full amount that the President has requested, provided only that the President agree to put us on a path to a balanced budget. That's it. We call it cut, cap, and balance. It has some immediate cuts. It has spending caps that put us on that path to a balanced budget, and it calls for the adoption of a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We had a Democratic president named William Clinton who, together with the Republican Congress in the 90s, acknowledged the importance of reaching a balanced budget. None of us think we can do it overnight. None of us are calling for that. But back then in the 90s, they decided they would strive for it, and in fact, they achieved it. We reached a balanced budget, ran a modest surplus. All I'm asking today, as we confront this issue and as we contemplate saddling ourselves and our kids and our grandkids with still more debt than the record level we have now, what I'm suggesting is, at the same time, we take the measures necessary to get us out of this mess, to prevent us from going further down this unsustainable path, and to get to the point where we don't continue running deficits. A path to a balanced budget. Cut spending now, statutory spending caps, and a balanced budget amendment. And we now have a big majority of Republican senators who've co-sponsored this bill that would raise the debt ceiling by $2.4 trillion, provided that we get these changes. And I'm increasingly optimistic that the House might very well pass a bill that would raise the debt limit, contingent only on this path to a balanced budget. So while we're down here today, I think this is what we ought to be talking about. We shouldn't go on to an appropriation bill that has no context because there's been no budget. We ought to be focused on getting this problem solved and then get back to the regular order of having a budget that defines the level of spending and where that money is going to come from and allows us to pursue the ordinary appropriation process so that we can exercise our constitutional responsibility to control the purse strings of this federal government. Senator Sessions, I thank you for raising this issue. This is a very important issue, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that it's a travesty that we don't have a budget in this body, and I certainly hope we don't go further down this path.
Well, I thank Senator from Pennsylvania. He's been such a fabulous addition to the committee, talented and experienced, and he's worked so hard that he's actually laid out a budget himself. The President has 500 people. The Congress here has a lot of staffers. Senator Toomey's produced a budget. The House has produced a budget, but we haven't seen one here. I'm pleased that my colleague, another member of the Budget Committee, Senator Ron Johnson, is here. He's a business person who traveled his state and talked with his constituents about his concerns about the debt this country faces. Senator Johnson, I'm pleased to hear your thoughts at this time.
Well, thanks, Senator Sessions. First of all, thank you for your leadership on this issue. You know I share your concern about the dysfunction of not only this body, our Budget Committee, but really Washington in general. I mean, Washington is broken. We are currently conducting business as usual here in Washington. It's bankrupting our nation. And certainly as having spent 34 years as a manufacturer, Senator, I recognize that you have to have a good process if you're going to have a good product. And because our process here is so broken, that's one of the reasons we're bankrupt in this nation, because we don't have a good process. I mean, it is, to me, unbelievable, sir, that in the United States Senate, we haven't passed a budget now in, what is it, 805 or 6 days? Over 2 years, we have not passed a budget yet in this body. And as an accountant, that's my background. You know, I've had to produce budgets on time for a wide variety of sizes of businesses. And it's simply unbelievable to me when I know how hard individuals and businesses work to produce a budget. And by the way, they generally present those budgets on time. They don't miss the budget dates. But they actually produce a budget, and there's an awful lot of work that goes into those things. And then I come here after 34 years in business, and I come to the United States Senate understanding, again, not because I wanted to be a United States Senator, sir, but because I realize we're bankrupt in this nation, that America is in peril. And I get here, and I hope to get on the Budget Committee so I can actually start solving this problem. And I get on the Budget Committee, and I'm ready to roll up my shirt sleeves and start working on the problem. And what do we hold? I think 6 hearings on the President's budget. A budget that was so unserious that it lost in this body 0 to 97. Not one member of the President's own party thought it was serious enough. Or maybe it didn't spend quite enough for them. Maybe it didn't tax enough for them. But for whatever reason, not one member of the President's own party decided to vote for that budget. I think that's a stunning repudiation. It's very disappointing, quite honestly, because right now, as our country faces bankruptcy, we are hungering for leadership, and we're not getting any. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if the President really was serious about addressing this issue, if he was serious about tackling this problem, he would have been coming to us months ago to negotiate in good faith to prevent the bankrupting of America. But that hasn't happened. So what's happening now? For the last few weeks, we've been holding some secret meetings, far from the view of the American public. I mean, I'm not sure, is that really how we're going to solve the financial future of America? I came here to work. I came here to be engaged in debate. I was hoping we would have a very open process under general order. But that's not what's happening. And what I'm afraid is we're going to end up with a deal that's going to be dropped in our laps with just a couple days to go, and then, kind of like the health care law, kind of like Dodd-Frank. All of a sudden you get these 1,000-page bills dumped in our laps with no time to review. And then you start seeing the unintended consequences of it. So I think that's just a real shame. And I just came from a press conference where every member of the freshman class, we had a meeting this morning, and we were talking about what can we do. I mean, we all came here in a very sincere desire to actually solve the problem. And one of the things we talked about is how President Obama now, rather than being serious about this, rather than really tackling the problem, he's beginning to scare seniors and members of our military. And we thought that was over the line. So we sent a letter to the President today asking him to please step up the plate, seriously address the problem, stop scaring our seniors, work with us. We want to help you solve the problem. But thank you, Senator
Johnson, and thank you for your great group of freshman senators who've added so much common sense to our problems. So we were not elected to preside over the financial decline of America. We were not elected to skirt the law. We were not elected to shut down committees, to shut down debate, to cede our constitutional responsibility to secret meetings and closed-door proceedings. We were elected to do our duty. And there is no higher duty than to protect the American people from a clear and present danger. For that reason, I will oppose cloture on today's appropriations bill. I will vote to sustain the budgetary point of order, and I will encourage my colleagues to support my amendment, raising that budget point of order to a threshold of 60 votes. This is only the beginning of our fight. There will be more votes, more objections, more points of order. Working with my colleagues, I will give all that I have to help put this country back on a sound, honest, solid financial path. Washington must recognize that America's strength does not lie in the size of our government, but in the scope of our freedoms and in the hearts of our people. The debt we have today is already pulling down our economic growth. Experts tell us we've lost 1% of economic growth because our debt exceeds 90% of our total economy, 90% of GDP. Well, it's 95% of GDP right now. We'll reach 100% of GDP by the end of this year. That alone reduces growth, according to the experts. Secretary of Treasury Geithner said he thought that was an excellent study that found that fact. And what does 1% growth mean? Well, instead of the first quarter having 1.8 or 2% growth, we would have had 3% growth. And if we'd had 3% growth instead of 2% growth, 1 million more jobs would be added per year based on just alteration of the difference between 2% growth and 3% growth. We've got to face these problems. I hope our colleagues are reaching a decision about how to proceed that can be successful. We've got to make progress this year. We're going to have to sustain progress for a decade. If we do so, we'll put this country on a right path. And if we get that debt down, it's not too hard to do it, really. We'll start seeing our growth come back and jobs be created, more wealth be created, more taxes be paid, less help to people poor and in need because they're now working when they weren't. So, Madam President, I thank the Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to share these remarks and would yield the floor. Quorum.
We'll call the roll. Mr. Akaka. Senator from Alabama.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, I would ask unanimous consent that it be in order for me to offer and receive a vote on an amendment to this bill which relates to a 303C point of order that requires adoption of a budget resolution prior to the consideration of any appropriation bills.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, the amendment is not germane to the bill, I'm trying to keep this bill bipartisan and free of extraneous matters. Therefore, I object.
Objections heard.
Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President, there is a cloture motion at the desk.
Clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
I ask unanimous consent and amend.
We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to waive the points of order under Section 303 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 for H.R. 2055, any amendments thereto, and motions thereon signed by 17 senators as follows: Reed of Nevada, Johnson of South Dakota, Kirk, Durbin, Hagan, Bennett, Warner, Kerry, Blumenthal, Boxer, Levin, Stabenow, Bingaman, Udall of Colorado, Murray, Leahy, and Whitehouse.
I ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that all time be yielded back.
Without objection. The question is, by unanimous consent, the clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to waive the points of order under Section 303 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 for H.R. 2055, any amendments thereto, and motions thereon.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to waive the points of order under Section 303 of the Congressional Budget Act for H.R. 2055 and any amendments or motions thereto shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Conrad, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Crapo, Mr. DeMint, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heller. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kerry. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Baucus, Blumenthal, Cardin, Inouye, Johnson of South Dakota, Kirk, Manchin, Menendez, Murray, Reed of Nevada, Schumer, Shaheen, Tester, Whitehouse. Senators voting in the negative: Bozeman, Inhofe, Kyle, McCain, Moran, Rubio, Toomey. Mr. Conrad, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Johans, aye. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, aye. Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Dement. Mr. Dement, no. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Coburn, no. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Vitter, no. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, no. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin, aye. Mr. Carey. Mr. Carey, aye. Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cochran, aye. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Lugar, aye. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker, no. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Isaacson, no. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, aye. Franken. Mr. Franken, aye. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, aye. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blunt, aye. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, aye. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Bingaman, aye. Ms. Mikulski. Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, no. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coates, no. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, no. Mr. Webb. Mr. Webb, aye. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown of Ohio, aye. Mrs. Hagan. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lieberman, aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Ayotte, no. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, No. Mr. Levin? Mr. Levin? Aye. Ms. Stabenow? Ms. Stabenow? Aye. Mr. Barrasso? Mr. Barrasso? No. Mr. Enzi? Mr. Enzi? No. Mr. Graham? Mr. Graham? No. Mrs. Boxer? Mrs. Boxer? Aye. Mr. Begich? Mr. Begich? Aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? Aye. Mrs. McCaskill? Mrs. McCaskill? Aye. Mrs. Feinstein? Mrs. Feinstein? Aye. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island? Mr. Reed of Rhode Island? Aye. Mr. Crapo? Mr. Crapo? No. Mr. Akaka? Mr. Akaka? Aye. Mr. Heller? Mr. Heller? Aye. Mr. Harkin? Mr. Harkin? Aye. Mr. Carper? Mr. Carper? Aye. Mr. Pryor? Mr. Pryor? Aye. Mrs. Hutchison? Mrs. Hutchison? Aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida? Mr. Nelson of Florida? Aye. Mr. Rockefeller? Mr. Rockefeller? Aye. Ms. Snow? Ms. Snow? Aye. Mr. Udall? Mr. Udall of Colorado? Aye. Mr. Leahy? Mr. Leahy? Aye. Ms. Landrieu? Ms. Landrieu? Aye. Mr. Lautenberg? Mr. Lautenberg? Aye. Mr. Merkley? Mr. Merkley? Aye. Mr. Chambliss? Mr. Chambliss? No. Mr. Portman? Mr. Portman? No. No. Mr. Shelby? Mr. Shelby? No.